So, Iain Smith will be speaking about childhood trauma and the failure of the justice system. Iain's been a lawyer for almost 3 decades and is a founding partner of Keegan Smith Defence Lawyers there in Livingston, also co-founder of Trauma Aware Lawyers in 2020, and sits on the West Lothian ACES Hub since 2018. Has been an active member in Aid and Abet and a contributor to the RRT subgroup. In 2019, Iain, you were the runner-up in the Herald Solicitor of the Year, and in 2020, you were awarded the Scottish Lawyer of the Year in the Scottish Legal Aid Awards. You're really one of these inspirational leading lawyers, and I think disclosing an interest as a lawyer, I think that there's so much more that we can do as a legal community to understand trauma and understand the role of human rights and children and young people's rights in the legal system, and you really are leading the way. So I'm really excited to be passing across to you, Iain.
So thanks very much, Bruce, and thanks to CYCJ for having me, and to Claire and Holly and the team and other people that I've no doubt forgotten about in the panic to try and get online. So apologies for being slightly late, everyone. It is something I take seriously. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the blinking thing to work, but anyway, I'm here now. And I might be sort of looking down the way I had it all set up, so I wasn't really looking away from everyone and tried to speak to the camera, but I'm here with you in spirit, and I hope the morning was good. I historically, I've been a solicitor now for 28 years, but for only the past 3 years, I was unaware of basically all my clients' battles with justice happening at birth. I used to think their battles were in court, but actually most of their battles are when they're young. And I now see this, and thanks to something that happened in March 2018, I managed to gain some awareness about the biological impact of trauma on the developing brain, in particular with young people. And it's that knowledge that's allowed me to change the way I am as a lawyer, probably as a person as well, more so. And then what I wanted to do with that in terms of expressing what I now recognise is hugely important for the justice system and elsewhere, and to raise awareness of that. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years. Formerly, I was involved with the children's hearing system. I haven't done that for a few years, but during the hearing systems themselves and the panels, the paramount consideration is the child's welfare and their best interest, and that's hugely important. And there we treat children generally as a priority and as a bit of a wee shame. And yet somewhat bizarrely, when they reach the magic age of 16, we seem to cut them loose and they go from being a wee shame to wee shites. And that's something I've watched as a solicitor within the children's panel, but also a solicitor in the justice system, in the adult court. And that stark change is that we don't realise we're still dealing with the same children, with the same problems and the same dysregulation, but we treat them so differently, and it's horrible to watch. So they literally float seamlessly like ghosts from the care system through to the justice system and almost inevitably into the prison system, and nobody seems to give a damn. And that for me it's unacceptable, and it's something I want to change, and that's why in part I'm speaking to you guys today. I now recognise that these traumatized children who are in pain, that their solution is often found in substances, for example, alcohol or drugs. And then we label them as alkies or junkies or neds or scum. And we do that even as lawyers. We call them punters, so that we can dissociate ourselves from them and view ourselves as better than they are, when in fact, actually, they're just the same as we are. We not only ignore their pain, but we marginalize them, we stigmatize them, we put them through the adult court system, and then we jail them. And then in large numbers, we allow them to die, often alone, and we never really care about them. I appreciate the participants and attendees today are probably not doing that, and you're all doing good things, but I'm explaining traditionally, certainly solicitors in particular in my world in criminal justice, is it's not really about compassion, it's not really about always doing the right thing, is that you're there in a split second of crisis where they've done something against the law, and then that's what you deal with. But for me, it's much more than that. And knowing about the impact of trauma It has not only made me a better lawyer, but it's led me to an awareness that lets me see people in a new lens. Stuart Shanker, who's an educationalist, I have to be careful how I say his second name, but Stuart Shanker says he sees a child differently. You see a different child. And I now do that with my clients, is that I see them completely differently. And also, it's not a battle between good and evil in my world. My clients, they will do bad things, but very few of them that I've met are bad or evil. And even the ones that are be deemed as that, I think, have often serious psychiatric conditions or they're mentally ill. So I don't think people are fundamentally evil or bad, but they can and are capable of doing bad things when they are not regulated. And there are things going on in the background that we can't physically see. And trauma awareness is also, it's not about being hard or soft on crime or on people we would term criminals, but for me, it's about being smarter. So the awareness is about being smarter about justice, or as Karen McCluskey calls it, smart justice. And it's better for the person who's hurt, who's committing crimes, but also better for the victims. It's a victim reducer, smart justice. It's a community improver. And for those just using a financial head, not a humanitarian or compassionate one, it's also a financial long-term benefit to the community. For me, we've got to focus on the who and not the what. The what is really what they've done rather than the who they are. And when we start to see who people actually are, then my view is we should act differently. There's also a fear, I think, amongst judges and amongst other people that say, well, everyone's going to say that they've got massive trauma in their life, that there's huge adversity. But as you guys will probably all know, that people don't talk about these very difficult things. They don't come forward and say, I've been sexually abused when I was young. Often that takes the death of a perpetrator, or where someone feels safe enough to disclose about abuse, that happens. So I don't think it will lead to floodgates or false claims. And also, the other difficulty is nobody wants to talk about it. So often you'll only discover about the actual pain, maybe when it's too late. So clients will say to me, apropos of nothing, often after the case, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but when I was 11, when I was 8, when I was 14, I was sexually abused. They often don't talk about neglect by parents because they still love their parents. And that's a very difficult thing to talk about. However, much of this painful information is often found if we do a little bit of digging in LAC reports, in medical reports, in school reports, and that's where it's disclosed. But much, as you guys will all know again, is hidden in the horrific iceberg of their childhoods. Everything is underneath, so it's hard to see. And I don't suggest that we lawyers or judges or unskilled people like me start playing psychologist where we could do more harm. But I do think it's important that we are aware, and lawyers who are not aware should become aware. And once you're aware, at that point, to me, it would be negligent to ignore the information, which is so critical and important to have a more compassionate justice system. Our system's default is for punishment and retribution. That's what we do as a justice system. That neither resolves nor solves, nor reduces crime. Smart justice is about repair and rehabilitation, the true things that will actually reduce crime and improve the outcomes for everyone. It's looking at the root causes and not the symptoms. We've yet to realize as a justice system that we can't punish people out of their trauma. We can't put people well by punishing them. And it's the same with addiction. You cannot punish people out of their addiction. We can put sticky plasters over it like methadone, but we're not actually helping people. We're not coming from it from a caring perspective, including in drugs courts, where again, we're dealing with a health issue in a justice forum by lawyers and judges trying to act in some ways compassionately, in some ways, not very often. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because we're dealing with it in the wrong forum, because drug addiction is a health issue. It's a trauma issue. That's where it stems from. So again, we're getting it all wrong. And if we think we're doing well in Scotland as a justice system, here's the stats. We have the highest prison population per capita in Europe. We have the highest drugs deaths in the world. This is Scotland we're talking about. This year alone, I've lost 6 clients to drug-related death. 3 of them I know were raped as children. They were in turmoil in something I didn't know until about 3 years ago. So that stat is not good. We certainly don't have, despite the fact we tell everyone we do, the best justice system in the world. Now, for me, trauma provides explanations and not excuses about what goes on in my world in the criminal justice system. But knowing what happened to someone, rather than questioning what is wrong with them, as we do just now, is the first step to understanding the real issues. For me, this is not good for business. So talking about trauma and reducing harm is not good, because my job is one where I'm a vested interest in misery and trauma. I'm like a vulture. I feed off and make money from misery. But I can no longer do that as simply because I know what is going on, and I have a more fundamental understanding as what is going on with my clients. I don't have all the solutions, but what I do as a lawyer is not treading on the toes of social work, is not becoming a doctor or a psychologist. But what I try to do is I try to listen more carefully. I try to empathize, act with compassion. I try to signpost my clients to help those with who are mentors with lived experience, or to their doctors, or to the general practitioners generally, or to social workers who can assist them. But I try to offer them hope, and I'm less quick to judge them. As a business model, it doesn't work. And as a thing to do, as you will all know, it is quite exhausting. And it often results in you have to persevere when someone falls in their arse and have to get back up. And you can be that helping hand to stick out your hand and help them up, rather than, as we do as a justice system, put our foot on their heads and squash them down. In 1938, Mahatma Gandhi, who was a lawyer as well, said, "A true lawyer is one who places truth and service in the first place, and emoluments or money of the profession in the next place only." And I did this job, and I started doing this job, and I believe other criminal lawyers do the job that we do because we genuinely wanted to help people. It sounds a bit twee, but that's why we do the job. And other things get in the way, business and finance, and quickness and ease. And it's so easy to leave the part which is the most difficult, which is addressing the unmet needs of clients, of recognizing their pain and having very difficult discussions if they want to have them. Some of my peers who I've spoken to at talks like this about traumatized clients and my desire for them to see them differently, I'm often met with, well, all they need is a wee bird, a wee hoose, and a wee job. But that's really the creation of tomorrow's wife beaters, because that trauma that they carry doesn't just disappear with a wee job and a wee hoose, and it doesn't go away. And I think James Docherty describes what we don't transform, we transmit, and that's what I see every day. In court, judges either don't know about trauma or they're blind to the impact of trauma. I'll not bother naming any sheriffs. I know that part of the sentencing council are with us today, so I won't name any judges either. But one of them said to me, "Your client seems to be coming off the rails, Mr. Smith," in reference to a 15-year-old care experienced girl. This rather naive view of my client fails to notice that this young girl has never been on the rails, not even in the womb before she was born. I have various stories to tell you, but I realise because I started slightly late, I'm going to have to curtail my talk. I'm going to talk now about, not the real names, Colin and Neil, 2 youngsters who were brought up in the care system, who were on the path to self-destruction, taking heroin, breaching orders, committing offences, and they both appear from custody. Rather fortunately for Colin, who is my client, he was remanded in custody for a few days pending reports. Neil, who seemed luckier at the time, was released on bail, and that night he died of a drugs overdose, which would have happened to Colin if he'd been out. And when I appeared before the judge, He asked me, how many chances do I need to give your client? And my reply was, my lord, he was born with no chance, so maybe we're due him a few more. And that boy, Colin, who was saved by not being put back into the community over those few days and found out his friend had died, he was on the telly. He asked me sadly if I thought that if he took his own life, if people would start to care about him the way they did about his friend who died. And would they say nice things about him? Because that is how miserable the people I see are, that often they would rather die. They would sacrifice what limited happiness they would have to take drugs to take away the much more seething pain that just follows them throughout their life. And that's who I see every day. One very senior judge talked about a young boy who grew up in chaos, that she didn't want to mollycoddle this boy, but only if she knew how he felt about the fact that he'd never been mollycoddled, he'd never been cared for. I'm not suggesting it's the judge's responsibility to do that, but for me, it's a lack of insight. She talked to him about having to help himself, about having to be responsible. A phrase I often hear from judges about my clients taking responsibility for themselves, when the judge doesn't actually understand or realize that many of these young people are not response-able. They're not capable because of the terrible trauma that they've suffered. They don't have the basics. I'm going to tell you about Brendan, another boy that I still continue to deal with, not his real name. Brendan was on a community payback order. Brendan's community payback order was telling him to do a variety of things, and he didn't do them. And he became homeless, and he started taking more heroin, and his life was in chaos. But before he appeared from custody, he managed to get help from the Rock Trust, from an organization called Aid and Abet, from his general practitioner who prescribed him medication, from his social worker, and from various bodies who decided to club together and help him. So when he appeared from custody, I explained to the sheriff all of these great things that he had done about getting a house. And I also then explained to her about his background, about the terrible trauma that he'd suffered, about the fact that from the age of 3, he was in and out of care, that during periods of sobriety, he was brought home to the care of his mother, who would go back to heroin or alcohol, in amongst various partners who had abused her and abused him, and in and out of care. And by the age of 11, he was taking alcohol. By the age of 12, he was taking cannabis. And by the age of 13, his mother had given him his first hit of heroin. And then aged 18, he appears in court before the sheriff, who then looked at me and says, "What is it you're asking me to do?" I said, "Well, I want you to praise him." "Sorry?" "I want you to praise him." The court was packed. You couldn't hear a penny or a pin drop. And she said, "Praise him? I'm going to jail him." I said, "Well, not yet. Give him a chance. Let's get reports." So 4 weeks later, I came back to court armed with a report telling about his horrific childhood. A report from Aid and Abet explaining the work they were doing, from the Rock Trust explaining the work that they were doing with him, the housing department to explain about his house, the social work to say about the great progress he had made. And then as I stood up with my gown on, ready to go battling with the sheriff, she told me to sit down and not to say another word. And as I sat for the next 10 minutes, all she did was praise my client. And it was a huge thing. As we both left the court, she gave him another chance. And he said to me, "Iain, nobody has ever spoken to me like that, ever in my life." And my one regret about that situation was I never went back into court to say, "You've no idea what you've just done for that boy." Because it made an influence and an impact. And it might not cure him, it doesn't knock people out of their trauma. But if you treat people like dirt, they will feel like dirt. And that's got to change. Another example of that briefly is a very good sheriff who is trauma informed and is a decent soul. After 18 years of service to the court as a judge, she described how one girl was in and out of her court all of the time, and into jail, out of jail, addiction, not addiction. And she followed this girl's path from the day that she started to the last day that she appeared. And she describes on the last day, she wanted to express her care for this girl. So she got down off the bench, took her wig and gown off, and she hugged the girl, and to let her know that she cared. And during her talk describing this, I put my hand up, and not to be rude to the sheriff, but said to her, what do you think would have happened to the girl if you hugged her the first day that you met her, rather than the last day? And the point of that is not that I want judges to start hugging clients, or as they would say in the red tops, hugging hoodies. I'm not on about that, but I'm on about expressing care and love for people who are very damaged and very traumatized in our system. It might work if we start early rather than waiting until it's too late to have a positive impact on people. For me, it's about dignity and respect. It's about empathy and compassion, what we would describe as soft skills, and yet these are the skills that you people employ every day, and they're the hardest skills to employ, because when you've got someone telling you to fuck off as a social worker, or to spit at you or be rude at you, the natural reaction is to respond in kind. But of course, we all know that the best way to respond with people who are being unkind is to continue to be kind. I think what I see as small miracles often, that these are things that are hugely important. And again, conscious of time, just to make you aware that some of the things I'm doing involve targeting students. So I've gone around with my colleagues. We've created what are known as the trauma-aware lawyers, as Bruce had indicated. We're not a fad. We want to stay, and we've been educating the lawyers of the future. We've gone to all 10 law schools and told the students about trauma and about how they can make the impact, because they're going to be the next generation of judges. The Law Society have championed what we're doing, and they have allowed time for us to be heard. The Judicial Institute, who train all the judges in Scotland, have promised that they'll look into this. And the brilliant Sentencing Council have draft guidelines about young people, which would be transformative, talking about helping people up to the age of 25 being viewed as young people, talking about trauma and its impact when considering sentencing, which they don't do just now. To me, it feels like there's something in the air, as they say in Gregory's Girl, there's something in the air, Charlie, tonight. And it does feel like there's something in the air that we've got to keep going. For the past 3 years, I've felt in my world, in the criminal justice field, that I've been a bit of a lone wolf, that I am, in terms of the fable about the boy on the beach. So I feel like I'm a boy on the beach looking at thousands of starfish stranded on a beach, and that throwing the individual starfish, and the wise man coming to me and saying, you know, what's the point of that? What are you doing? You're not going to save all of these starfish. And then bending down and throwing one in and knowing that you've made a difference to that one. For me recently, it feels as if there's a bit of momentum. So there's more people on the beach throwing the starfish back in. But the way to turn the tide is from a systems point of view, where we're all doing the same thing. We're all recognizing the impact of trauma on people in the justice system, and that the judges and the Sentencing Council and the Judicial Institute and the government and social workers and the police and the prosecutors and everyone involved recognizes this, and then we'll be able to turn the tide and create a much better, a more compassionate and fairer justice system. I'm grateful to you for listening to me. I realise I have gone slightly over my time. I was keen to answer any questions, but thank you for letting me speak at your conference.
Thank you so much, Iain. And if we'd been together in person, you would have seen people standing up on their chairs and clapping and really celebrating what an amazing contribution that you've made. If you get a chance to have a look at the chat or look on Twitter, you'll be seeing those comments. So please do feel the love and thanks that's coming your way at the moment, even though we can't show it in person. That was a fantastic presentation, and it gels so much with the discussions earlier, and particularly Hannah Snow, who was a young person who told us a lot about her experience, and so much of that gelled with what the life that you've given to the voices of the clients and the other young people that you've worked with, in terms of just feeling not being seen, that distressed behavior not being recognized, and the need to change the system to make sure that we see that quote that I think resonated with lots of people, kind of the idea that we see the we shame becoming the we shite. The first Children's Commissioner, Kathleen Marshall, talked about kind of little angels becoming devils, and this idea that we fail to see children as children, and that has to be a fundamental change. So so much, I'm glad we recorded that presentation, because so much of what you were saying has resonated so strongly with everyone. There was so much richness and depth in there. There is one question that I saw pop in to the chat, and it links in with what you were saying there about being on the beach with the starfish. It's really positive that you can see this change coming, but where would you say, in a scale of kind of 1 to 10, that we are at the moment in terms of the legal profession and judicial? How big is the journey ahead of us?
Well, so 3 years ago, I did an article with Suzanne Zedike. We published it in the Law Journal, and that went out to 11,000 lawyers, just like that. And I thought, that was me done. And, you know, I didn't ever intend to continue a campaign or a journey other than maybe personally just continuing to advocate about trauma awareness. But I just presumed that's an article, it explains the science, people will get it, and everybody will change. And of course, as you know, Bruce, it doesn't work like that. It's a journey, and it's a drip feed. We as a local council, local authority and hub, we purchased the license for the film Resilience by the late and great James Redford, son of Robert Redford. And we started doing screenings along with Kevin Neary, Aidan Abett, and Fiona Jenkins. And we had Lisa Marie Purdy, who was the UK Solicitor of the Year. The local authority were very supportive. So we went around all the schools and thought education was key, early intervention, prevention, reduction of harm, and then to health. So we went to the hospital, we went to general practitioners, and then we grabbed one of the general practitioners who's in charge of child protection for West Lothian. So all of this, we thought, well, all this will work. And other jurisdictions were doing something similar. But of course, again, it doesn't quite work like that, because fundamentally the system really remains the same, and it's a very slow train that's hard to turn. So the massive thing that's happened, and again, as part of the delegates today, we have the Scottish Sentencing Council. That's a very strong and powerful body who try to do good. They do good for the whole community. So that has to at times include difficult things. That when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking it from a perpetrator's point of view, that someone that's causing harm. But of course, on the other side of that, we have victims who are receiving harm. What we've got to see, though, is the fact that often the two are the same people. And again, you guys know that. So in terms of where we are with the journey, I think the one biggest thing that could happen, if the draft guidelines that are being drafted by the Scottish and Sentencing Council come in, then we're immediately overnight going to recognise trauma is a massive thing in the justice system. We know this because nearly all addiction is stemmed from trauma. So we know that already, and we treat addiction in our justice system, not in our health system. So that's not going to change right away. But if we start doing clever things, for example, diversion away from prosecution, not putting children who are 16, who are in care and from a care system into the adult courts, put them back in the children's hearing system. Even if it's something quite extreme. I dealt about less than a year ago with a culpable homicide for a 14-year-old boy. His father was convicted of murder, his uncle was convicted of murder, and he was convicted of culpable homicide. And the very brave judge could have given him 10 years without blinking, didn't. She put it back to the children's hearing system because she recognised that 14-year-old child, his whole life would be over. And yet he could still positively contribute to society. He's not been in trouble since. And that's a very brave thing. So these brave steps are happening now, but they're very small steps. But in terms of seismic change, Sentencing Council is big. Pursuing with the students is a big thing for me, because it means all these students, the next generation of lawyers, are going to get it. The Law Society are very engaged with it. They're providing training. So I have hope, but we've got a long way to go. and I'm not finished, even though I thought it was 3 years ago. I've just started.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Iain. And again, lots more kind of comments and questions coming in, invites to speak in other places, questions about whether you've spoken yet at places like the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscals. And so I'll let you have a chance to kind of catch up with some of that chat in the chat function there, but really strong messaging in terms of we need to celebrate the incredible champions like yourself and that we see across the profession and some in the judiciary, but it really requires those system changes to take a rights-based approach to ensure that children are seen as children first. So thank you so much. Hopefully you'll be able to stay on for a little bit and engage in some of the chat, because I know there's lots of people that are wanting to talk to you, but I also know you're a very busy man as well. So thanks so much once again for joining us.